Hi, this is Siddhi, and today we are going to learn about autism and apraxia. Okay, apraxia is a condition where the person has motor planning issues and has has difficulty planning his muscle motor movements to execute a task. Okay, it's a condition that is found separately also, and in addition, and it is also found with autism. Okay, so let's look at how you find how apraxia exhibits itself in the form in autism. Okay, so the first, so these are some signs that you will see when you see apraxia in autism. Okay, now keep in mind apraxia also affects in different degrees. So the mildest forms are typically in with children who are verbal who have apraxia. So the apraxia doesn't really affect their speech, but it affects the other areas of their body. While the most severe ones are the ones where you have who with children who are supposed to be called the level threes. Okay, severely affected with autism. Okay, so the first signs that will see with children with apraxia is you will see that there'll be delayed milestone. If you look at the history, you will get feedback saying that they all their walking, crawling, turning, everything was delayed. Sometimes it's delayed by a few months. Sometimes it's delayed severely by like a year plus or 2 years. Many a times, like I've seen children who are 3 4 and they're still walking, climbing stairs, are not running properly and everything, even at 3 4 years of age, so it can be quite delayed too. Second aspect that you see with children with apraxia very frequently is hypotonia. Hypotonia is basically where the tone of your muscle is very poor, and the tone of your muscle is very important because your skeleton is not supposed to be your skeleton is typically is essentially flexible, right? So it requires the muscles to work with the muscles to have good tone, to basically prop your body and to give strength to strength so that you can execute actions. Okay, so these are the children that you will see. The parents will talk about the fact that they're doing w sitting. If you see them sitting, you'll see that their back is curved. You will see that when they're sitting, their base of sitting is very wide, so they'll sit like you see around 1 year, 6 months to 1 year baby, with their legs completely wide apart and keeping things between their legs and doing things. You will also find that as they grow older, they will not, if you ask them to do writing tasks, they will not sit up straight for long. They'll lie down on the table and they'll write. They will also complain about things like their hands getting tired, that sort of stuff. So these are all basically signs of hypotonia. Another aspect that you find a lot of the times with children with apraxia is especially the ones who get diagnosed as having apraxia is speech delay. Speech delay, it can be speech delay as in there is no speech at all, and it can also be clarity of issues where the child is speaking something, is making sounds, but is not able to make is not clear. Okay, there are some children who have speech, but they have fine motor delay. They don't get typically, like in autism, they don't get labeled as having apraxia, but there is the apraxia element over there too. Typically in autism, when an apraxia diagnosis is added into the autism diagnosis, it's always with the speech delay aspect. But the ones with fine motor delay are typically treated as autism with fine motor delay, but essentially the premise is very similar. The underlying issue is very similar with both of them, and you'll see as we go ahead why it is very similar. Okay. uh, So it's similar because of the fact that if you look at all of these people who have all of these children who have autism with apraxia, even if they have speech, you will see that they will have difficulty learning areas. So many of these children, you will see that they will take a longer time to learn basic skill sets like buttoning their shorts, wearing your clothes, eating your food. They'll be messy eaters, so all of those are again a sign of apraxia. So it's not necessarily just speech as a factor that is there. Another part that you see with children with apraxia, and this comes up with children who have speech and also do not have speech, is that they have very poor imitation. Okay, so the imitation skills will be delayed. Now the ones who have speech, they will have good imitation skills with the speech aspect of it, but but they will have imitation skills which are poor with the gross motor part of it. Okay, so, but overall, generally, imitation, especially level threes, all areas of imitation are generally affected. The other thing that you see a lot of the times with children with apraxia is that they will be either too they will have a lot of movement. So these are the ones that you see them horsing around, just bouncing all over the room, rocking, shaking, or you will see them completely switched off, like just sitting and completely lost. So this is where it becomes very difficult because they tend to get labeled as hyperactive, but they're not actually. I'll explain later why they're not actually hyperactive, but that's one of the things that you see with them very frequently. Okay, another thing that you see, especially with the level threes, is that when you're doing ABA, you will have difficulty with errorless, ABA. Errorless ABA is where basically ABA basically, especially the discrete trial training aspect of ABA, which is what is used primarily with children with autism. When you talk about ABA as a technique, is it has a protocol that you have to have three back-to-back errorless trials, and then you can sort of take that skill and say that it is done. But especially the level three ones, where the apraxia affects the whole body, you will see that this is something that they are not able to achieve, and that's the reason why they're generally kept on a lower level program, because they cannot give a errorless trial, three errorless trials to allow the therapist to move to the next level goal that is there. Another thing that you will see a lot of the times with this population is you'll see generalization issues. Means they'll be learning a particular skill set at one point, but they may not generalize it at another place. So, like say for example, I've seen many a times with this population. I've seen kids, because typically this is the population, because they have delays. They're typically, before they come to me, they're already doing OT. So I will see them sitting on the table and doing things like putting in beads, putting in the shapes puzzle. So they're doing the pencil grip over there. They're doing the tripod grip over there when they're putting in pegs. But they have not learned to use the same thing to maybe tear a roti, or maybe to pluck something and pluck a leaf. They're not able to do that, so they're not able to figure out that you can use your hands in that format too. So many a times you will see that outside the therapeutic setup, they will typically show a lot of hand flapping. They will show a lot of stimming with their hands, because they don't know how to use their hands, and in many ways it will feel like they don't really understand what to do with their hands. Okay, now, because it's a delay in motor development, typically you will have hand preference that is delayed, and we'll explain later in the video why that happens. But that's another aspect that you will see with children who have apraxia. Okay, so what areas does apraxia affect? That's the first thing. Let's understand that. Okay, so apraxia basically affects your motor planning and execution of a task. So any task that you're doing has an element of planning and execution. Okay, so say for example, if I take something as simple as tearing a roti and eating it, then it has a planning where I have to plan that I have to take my hands, pick up the roti, move my hands. I have to basically plan that I have to take my hands, move my hands to a pincer grip. Then I have to hold it with pick up the roti with one hand, understand how much pressure I'm supposed to put, pick up with the other hand, understand how I'm supposed to pressure I'm supposed to put. Then I have to, tear full, hold on, tear till the time it completely tears, and then tear again, and then pick it up. So this is a plan. Now, once I formed a plan, I have to execute that plan. Okay, so apraxia basically affects all of this. All right, and this is one of the issues that you have with people when they view people with apraxia, is that they equate not being able to execute as equal to not being able to know. Okay, and if you talk to so for me, my most interesting apraxia kid that I read about was this kid called Ido, who has written his book, and he used to have a YouTube channel also at one point of time, who has what it looks like apraxia and autism with apraxia, and so he would type and talk about what he's his he would express himself. He was non-verbal and he used to express himself using ASCs and keyboard as a function, but basically what that showed me, someone like Ido showed me that it is not, apraxia is equal to not knowing, and that's one of the things that is there. So basically, if you ask me, apraxia for me is more in terms of is like, you have the concept in your head, you have things in your head, you have the thoughts, you have the cognition, but you don't have the ability to get your body to cooperate and function with you for it. So it's not really a reflection of lack of cognition. Okay, so to put it in gross, this is what apraxia is like. Like I said, apraxia affects imitation. And why does it affect imitation? So, imitation as a skill set is a very natural skill set. It comes up with most of the people very, very easily. But if you think about what is imitation, imitation basically requires you to look at a person, okay, watch the sequence of actions that the person is doing, break it up in your head, okay, what the actions the person is doing, and then understand which body parts are we using, okay, and then identify those body parts on yourself, which is where body awareness comes in. And many people with apraxia and autism will have poor body awareness, okay, and then placing those actions on the body and then executing it. So if you see, something that we sort of take for granted is actually a very, very, very complex task. And because apraxia pretty much affects your planning ability, you will see that this is a problem. And this is a problem that you even see with verbal children with apraxia, because motor planning issues, because if you talk to them, these are the ones who will talk a lot, but they have difficulty with doing a lot of motor related activities. All right. The other issue that they have, and this is something that happens with a lot of times with the level threes, is that they have difficulty processing commands. Okay, so what would happen is, say for example, if you have a simple command like if say I have kept two objects, and I want him to give a particular object out of it. Okay, what would happen is these children will have, something as simple as a basic give command requires you to listen, look down, scan, label, as in place the noun, pick up, and give. Okay, so what's going to happen is they will make a mistake in these sequences, and that's the reason why you'll see a lot of the times these guys will do things like they'll pick up whatever is there. So if I say give cup, and I have a cup and spoon on the table, they will basically just hear the word give and they'll pick up anything that is there in front of them and they'll give. Okay, sometimes what they'll do is they will pick up, if their right hand has shot ahead, they've not scanned down, they've missed the scanning step, they will pick up whatever is there, whichever is their hand preference, they'll pick that up and they'll give it. Many a times they will know, so they will look at the right object with their hand, because the left hand has come up, they will pick up the wrong object and give it. So typically what you will find is there's a lot of confusion with executing of the task, and that's the reason why, like I said earlier, this is the population that does very poorly with typical ABA in the format that is taught, that is done with people generally, because it does not give the person the space to process and to understand. And we'll talk more about it, how what actually works with them. We'll talk about it later, but that's what happens with them. Okay, attention. Now this population, now this is connected to the movement wala piece. So this population typically, many of them, I'm not saying it's for all, but many of them will have arousal issues. Arousal issue is basically where your brain needs to sort of be in an optimal place in terms of his arousal. So arousal is like a uh, it's basically like a it's how alert your brain is. Okay, so your brain, if it's at a low arousal level, it requires more input to be optimal, and then to be able to do things, to hear, to scan, to understand, and to speak. All right. Now, what happens is that their system typically requires a lot of arousal, and that's the reason why you will see that they will be taking a lot of movement. They will be, bouncing around. Their seeking is typically completely, out of. They don't understand how much they need to seek, but they end up seeking a lot, and they don't actually seek in the right manner many a times. But because the arousal is low, if the arousal is low, they will show signs of attention issues. So they will show signs like you will feel that they're not paying attention to what you're saying, they're not hearing, they're not understanding, but that's not really. And then you'll think that they don't know, but it's not actually they don't know. Their arousal is not up, they're not at the optimal arousal level. That's the reason why they're not taking in the commands that you're giving them. Okay, another thing that this population, especially level threes, would have is the thing that we talked about earlier, is that they're very poor at generalization. So they'll do very well at the OT, in the OT therapy. Like they will climb the stairs in the physiotherapy. They will do the beads in the OT, but they will not use the same pincer grip when I'm asking them to, maybe pick up a spoon, or maybe you know pick up say for example, what let me think, pick up a cup and put it on the counter, or pick up a bowl and keep it in the trolley. They're not going to generalize it by themselves. You have to make them generalize it. All right. So overall, if you see, this is how the motor planning apraxia would affect the person in general. And like I said, it's more a level three. It's more severe when with the level threes, where the apraxia essentially affects the whole body. Right. Now, what works with this population? What works, number one, is exercise. So, now here is where this is a population, if you ask me, you have to do very, very, very targeted intervention or teaching. You cannot do random things, because everything is level by level. Okay, so the first thing you need to work on is exercise. Why do you have to work on exercise? Because if you work on exercise, then you're going to be able to improve the muscle tone of the child. Okay, until and unless the child's muscle tone is not up, a simple task like climbing upstairs using alternate steps, or um, walking down without holding the railing, or jumping with both the feet in the air, or jumping down from something. All of this is not going to happen, because you require a good tone on your torso, on your legs to be able to do it. Similarly, speech cannot come in without good core strength. Okay, so the first part you need to work on is exercise. If you do the exercise, then slowly, slowly the tone will start coming up, which will lead to the next step, which is gross motor. Okay, you have to work on gross motor of the child first. You cannot, and this is what happens a lot of the times with these for this population, is that typically when they get references, they typically get a reference for the OT first. Okay, and OTs by profession are supposed to work on hand and on hand eye hand coordination and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that is not deficit. It is deficit with this population, but development works from gross to fine. Okay, so if development works from gross to fine, you when you go to just OT, you're directly going to fine. Okay, that doesn't work. You have to first go from gross. Also, functionally, a person who cannot walk properly, who cannot run properly, who cannot jump properly, who cannot climb the stairs properly, what is functionally more useful, sitting on the table and chair and writing, or is it more functionally useful for the person to walk independently? So the second thing that you have to work on with this population is gross motor. Now, like I said earlier, this population typically has a lot of issues with arousal level being very low. Okay, many a times. I'm not saying with everybody, but many a times they have arousal level being very low. Now, especially the very severe ones, all right? So now, how do you bring up the arousal level? If you make them sit and do a task, the arousal level is going to go drop off. Okay, they are going to go off. So even if you hammer, shout, scream, do everything, it's not going to work out because they are off. But the easiest modification that you can do is basically do the task standing. Tell the child to do the same tabletop activities but in a standing format. Okay, so the child gets the option of doing his movement, and he stands straight and his arousal is up and he's able to function. Okay, the other thing that is very important with this population is processing time. Okay, what is processing time? Processing time is giving the child the space to listen, scan, process, and then execute. Okay, but this is where I find that many professionals too, ABA and OTs, like when I've watched videos of professionals working with the children and parents, obviously, but parents learn from the ABA therapist and the OTs, is that they don't give processing time. Okay, so what do I mean by processing time? Processing time is basically letting the person go through the steps, to do a task. All right. So let me give you an example. Okay, so now when I'm doing a task, say for example, I'm doing a simple gift task where I want the child to give me a glass. Okay, so how would I do it with processing time? What I would do is, number one, I would block the child's hand. I would either hold the child's hand or I would push the child's hand off the table. Okay, once I have pushed the child's hand off the table, I will wait for the child to look at me. So now when the child looks at me, I know the child is listening to me. Okay, when the child listens to me, looks at me and listens to me, I would say glass. And then I'll hold his hands down until the time he looks at the glass. When he looks at the glass, I will block the hand that is of wrong preference. If he has developed preference, I would block the hand that is of wrong preference. If he has not developed preference, I would see which hand is he moving, and I would block the remaining hand, the other hand, and then I'll guide that hand. Means I would just touch that hand and wait for him to go to the glass. And once he picks up the glass, then I would say give. All right. So processing time is basically going that slow, and this is very important for for especially the level threes, is because they don't. It's not that they don't know. It's just that they require processing time, and we in and typical ABA typically tends to, and this is something OTs also do. We tend to talk very fast, which doesn't work with this population. All right. The other issue that a lot of the times this population will have is that works with this population very, very, very well is that you don't do OT. You do OT. I'm not saying that you don't do OT. OT is important for this population, but what you do is you take the OT and you do it in the form of ADLs. Means you literally teach the child to use his hand and his body throughout the day, because keep in mind what I said earlier, this population typically has generalization issues. So since they have generalization issues, what's going to happen is that they are going to you teach them a skill set that's you teach them any skill set that's not going to generalize at home. So at home you need to teach them that those hands that they have, the body that they have, it's supposed to be used. So the easiest and the best way for them to learn is basically taking the time to get them to use their body throughout the day. All right, then that hand usage will come in, and then the motor planning will come in, and then the flapping and everything will go down. Just sending them to OT 5 days a week or 6 days a week is not going to work. You have to literally take every ADL task and do it like hand on hand, hand on hand, and then slowly fade off. And the reason why this is important is because, like I said earlier, this population has motor planning issues. Okay, so motor planning issues means at any given point of time, whether you talk about when they're 3-year-old, 4-year-old, or when they turn 20, 30, 40, when they have to think and plan an activity and execute an activity, they are going to struggle. But there's a bypass mechanism for this. This is something that people do a lot with people who have strokes, who are people who are recovering from strokes, because apraxia also comes up with people who have strokes. Okay, and what you do is you use muscle memory. All right. So and how do you develop muscle memory? If you keep on doing the repetitions of the same thing again, again, it becomes a muscle memory. Okay. And muscle memory means you don't have to think about it. And we use muscle memory many a time, most of the time in our life. If we as people who don't have apraxia, if we went off having to think about every single thing that we did, we would actually not be able to move as fast as we're doing right now. Okay, so we always do this thing that we move things to muscle memory. So simple thing like, say for example, you have typing. Now, if you notice, when you started typing on the first go, you would have, you would have typing where you would literally have to look at the keyboard and identify where the letters are and type. But if you keep on doing it for months and years, what will happen is after some time, your fingers are literally going to just land in that place. So that's the reason why when people go off and say, that I don't remember numbers very well, or I don't remember the passwords very well, but if you just give me the phone, I'll just enter it because it's there in on my fingertips. The concept of it's there in my fingertips is what is called as muscle memory. So the way to bypass this motor planning issues that people have in apraxia is to basically do so many repetitions in a real environment, so that it becomes a muscle memory and the person doesn't have to think. All right, so this is a very active process that works with this population. All right. The other thing that is important to do with this population is to fade the prompt. So as you start teaching them, you have to start fading the prompt as fast as possible, because this population tends to be very, very, very prompt dependent. Okay, they're very easy to become prompt dependent, partly because of the fact that they obviously they struggle with motor planning issues. So many a times parents, like I've mentioned in my previous videos, that parents and therapists literally don't have patience to let the person perform. So they'll kind of give a lot of hand on hand prompt and gesture prompts, and they will keep on giving verbal prompts to get the person to do things faster. So what happens is that they develop this algorithm in their mind that you don't have to do anything unless the adult comes in and does it. So that's one factor that is there. The other factor which is very interesting about this population is that, and it's mainly true for the level 3s, is that this population tends to have very good social awareness and interest. So unlike my level ones, who are generally very, very, very poor in social interest, the level threes are actually very interested in social in society, in people around them. So many a times they will actively, my level ones will want to become independent. So if I teach them areas, they will go off and do it by themselves, and they'll actively ask to do it by themselves. But my level threes will typically, even if they know it, they will hold on to it because they like that attention and engagement that they get when their mother, their father, or somebody comes and does things with them. Okay, so that becomes like a source of attention for them. So that's the reason why fading prompt is very important with this population. The other thing that is very important with this population is to do oromotor repeatedly. Okay, so you should be, so typically what happens with oromotor practice, this is what the speech therapist would do, is that the speech therapist will typically do it in the therapy setup, and it's never done at home, or it's probably done once in a day at home. But keep in mind that oromotor is the same as doing any sort of practice. So when we talked about using hands and legs and body throughout the day, the same way it's using the mouth throughout the day. So you obviously cannot get the child to speak. So what you do is you do small bursts of oromotor practice, which is very useful for formation of words and speech. Okay. The other thing that is very useful for this population is using AACs. Now AACs are it's not something that is very prevalent in India, but if you go abroad, the moment you have autism plus apraxia diagnosis and retrieval issues also, you're going to have AAC. In fact, without apraxia, typically if you go any other country, you would not have anyone working with that person without an AAC. Okay, so that's the default piece that is there for this population. Okay, the other very, this is a very important thing that is there, and that's the reason why I've given it a separate slide, is that this population is the kinds where you have to basically take smaller number of goals, and you have to keep on repeating till the time the goal is achieved. Okay, the simple reason being that like we talked about, it has to go to muscle memory. So when I say smaller number of goals, you have to be very conscious about what kinds of goals you take. So here is where your reviewing, which is the first video that I put in, understanding your child's profile, becomes very important, because you, and we'll talk more about the errors that parents make later, but your goals have to be absolutely in par with what your child's profile is. You can't come up with any random thing just for time pass. Okay, it has to be fixed number of goals, and then you want to move upwards with them. Okay, now let's go over what are the mistakes that parents and therapists make. So this is connected to what we were talking about just earlier. The first mistake that parents make with this population is to get stuck with speech. Now, anything, when you talk about speech, writing, both of these are motor, they require motor planning and executing. Okay, so basically, when therapists and parents say that I just want my child to speak, I don't want to use ASE, I just want my child to write because everybody writes in school, that's basically saying that a child who's blind, you want them to say that, okay, I just want them to see because everybody sees. All right, that's ridiculous. When your child gets a diagnosis of autism plus apraxia, you're essentially saying that he has an extra issue. Okay, you will not take a person who has had a stroke and because of that stroke developed apraxia and tell that person that you have to speak just because you could speak before the stroke. The same way, you cannot tell a person who has apraxia that you have to speak only. Okay, and that is, according to me, one of the wrong goals that parents get stuck with. Now, I'm not saying that you should not work on speech, but speech doesn't become a priority when you have apraxia. Okay, a speech becomes a secondary thing, writing becomes a secondary thing. Okay, you have to focus, because you can have accommodations for speech and writing, but you cannot have accommodation when somebody thinks that you're mentally retarded. Okay, so the first two errors that a lot of times the people do with this population is they get stuck with speech and writing. Okay, the other connected to that is that that now this is not something that happens in India. It happens mostly in the Western countries, where, like I said, in Western countries, typically, and I have very few kids on it, but what I've seen with the few kids that I've seen is that they do use ASCs, but they don't pair up ASCs with oromotor. Okay, so so although I don't like forcing my kids to speak if they're not ready for it, but I always believe that everything that you do should be brought together. So if I'm working on speech, on oromotor exercises, then I will make a point that I'll put in pair up the oromotor with the AAC. Okay, so that's another thing that mistakes that therapists do. The other mistake that therapists and parents do, the mistakes of therapists and parents, is that the therapy is OT is they get stuck with OT. So I recognize the fact that this population has a heavy OT requirement, but they but just doing OT in therapy like 5 days a week, 6 days a week is actually a self-defeating process, because what happens is that they learn the motor plan for the equipments and the material in the OT room, but the OT room is not the real world. All right, so you're basically adding an extra step in for them. They have to now learn the skill set in the OT room and then figure out again a new motor plan for applying that skill set in real life. Like if you take a simple example, if I have to cutting paper is like this. Okay, in the OT room, it's done like this. All right. But if you look at, if I have to cut a packet, I have to hold like this and have to cut like this, or I have to hold with both hands, like one hand properly, and I have to cut like this. So there is an application to it. Now you have added a step to it, so it's more useful to learn a little bit from there and go from for some go home for some kids, and for some kids it's literally more useful, especially the ones with severe apraxia where the whole body is sort of struggling with execution of motor plan. It's much better to just teach it in the environment. You don't put the OT step in, because that extra step is very confusing for them. All right, and connected to that then is the next point, that most of the time this population is what gets labeled as mentally retarded. Okay, they get labeled as mentally retarded with autism. And why? Because they are not able to perform, and they're not able to perform because many a times the therapy techniques are not catering for their apraxia. If you even talk to parents, this is where I find parents don't understand. They keep on looking at these children that they supposedly think that are behaving normal, and that's the reason why they're out of autism, but they seem to miss out the fact if that those children typically just have an autism diagnosis. They do not have an autism plus apraxia diagnosis. So if your child has two diagnoses, and at times in addition to that sensory issues also, so how do you expect someone who has three labels to go and function at the same level as level 1? Okay, so that's one error that is there. And second is that there is a human tendency to think that someone who doesn't speak is mentally retarded. All right, means you can't speak means there's nothing in the brain, and this was there even earlier. That's the reason why deaf and dumb population would be considered as dumb. If you look at the ones who had what's her name, there's this really famous girl on whom the movie Black was made. She was considered to be mentally retarded and mad because of the fact that she did not speak. But that's the point. Just because you do not have you have issues with your speech abilities, and your speech abilities does not make you mentally retarded. All right. And if you look at Ido initially, before they started using ASE, was actually supposed to be was diagnosed as mentally retarded. And once the ASEs were started to be used with him, then he actually reassessed his IQ, and they actually found out that he has a very high IQ. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is that that's essentially what is something that you have to keep in mind. Okay, the other mistake, like I mentioned this earlier also, is that therapists and parents tend to talk too fast, they keep on pushing them, they keep on, they don't allow them processing time. So one of the techniques that has been developed by one of the parents, which is called rapid prompting method, RPM. And although I like the premise that they come from, that the children are cognitively intact and they are able to understand, I don't like the rapid prompting method of it. I feel that, as in, I don't agree with the rapid prompting method of it. In my practice, I have seen that it is more easier if I just, give the child, say, or give the child a command and then give him the processing time and let him perform, rather than just push for the child. Okay. Also, like I said earlier, focusing too much on errorless teaching, that doesn't work with this population. Okay. The other thing that a lot of the times this is done with this population, which I think is completely wrong, is using science as a way of communication. And this is where I think the speech therapists typically tend to sort of try to throw general things at try to generalize people who have just speech and language issues with autism without really understanding the underlying issues. Signs are not possible with someone with apraxia. Why are they not possible? Because signs require you to have fine motor planning. Okay, signs require you to have fine motor imitation. If you don't have either of them, even if you do end up teaching signs like eating, drinking, they are very gross and they don't actually make sense to a lot of people, and they're not covering everything that the person requires to speak. And the amount of investment of time and energy that goes into teaching that science is literally, which is in months, that's a waste of time. Okay, because you have apraxia is equal to motor planning issues and executing issues. So science is a wrong way to go, because science requires motor planning. All right, so using science for communication is a mistake that I feel that is done with this population. You should directly go to ASCs. All right. Now I'm going to bring in, like I said, this population is a little bit there I find a lot of contradictions between me and other people when I work with this population. So I'm just going to put down some of the challenges that I have faced when I've worked with this population. Okay, so the first so the challenges are not with the child. It's rarely with the child. The first challenges are primarily with the adults that work with the child. The first issue that I have faced with this population is generalization. So even if I have been able to use ASCs with this population, I have been able to get them to. So I have had children that I have got them to be able to understand, perform at the level that they're supposed to, but they do not go ahead, or they get stuck because the other people that they go to. So I work one on one, correct, with my kids and with the families, but I train the families so that they can go and work out with other people. But what I've found, which has been very frustrating, is that I teach the child to use ASCs. The child learns to use ASCs very well, is very comfortable, is very fluid with it. And then he goes to school, or he goes to another therapy environment, or he goes to another special school, and that person turns around and says that we don't use ASCs over here. We just use signs, or we just, get this person to speak, or worst is we just tell the person to do it at that time. We don't want to listen to him. Okay, so that's been very, very frustrating for me, because I've had kids who have been very fluent, some of them even typing on hours what they want to say, in a conversational format. But when they go to other professionals, the professionals refuse to use them, and because the professionals refused, other professionals and people refuse to use them, the parents stop using them themselves. Okay. Second factor that I find, and this is where I find that even parents tend to sort of mess with each other, because many a times I have, because I know that these are level threes and they're the ones who get misunderstood the most in this population. I tend to refer them to other people who also have autistic children and they're in this field. And what I find is that even those people don't understand that ASCs are important. Even those people get turned around and say that, you know what, you don't need to use ASCs, we just do signs, or my son can do this, or why do you need him to tell you all of this stuff, let him just do this much is more than enough. This sort of thing a lot of the times, parents do to each other, is also very frustrating for me as a therapist, because my kids, the kids I'm working with, they work to a certain level and then they get stagnated because there's no support, and then the parent feels that maybe, Siddhi, I am pushing them too much, and they obviously, because this is a very, very, very severe condition, okay, they feel that it's more safer and easier to work with other people, and they move out. And it's frustrating for me as a therapist, because it it feels like, okay, I've got the kid somewhere, and the kid is not going ahead. But I also feel that it is frustrating for the child too, because the child basically, child or the adult basically, does not have the ability to communicate, express, and tell what they want. They just get treated as MR, which I think is very sad. All right. The other the other thing that I find very, very difficult with this population is, there is a tendency to, so there is a tendency to normalize, okay, and the need for normalization is very bad in this population. So what do I mean by need for normalization? So many a times what happens with this population, when I work with them, the child will start using ASCs, you'll have some words coming up, the child will start, following commands and everything, the way, with the modifications that I do, and with the exercise and the tone coming up and everything. And then the parent or the therapist feels that, okay, fine, now I want to work on speech. The child has started speaking now, let's get him to speak more. The child has started, following commands now, let's put him in the school. Now, this doesn't work with this population. Why? Because you're now putting in a goal which has no relevance. All right. Keep in mind that what we talked about earlier, that your goals should be focused. If you have a non-verbal person who does not have the ability to use ASC's 100%, who does not have the ability to move around by himself independently, that person is never going to be functionally going into the society independently. All right. So, doing things like sending them to school, which is essentially a training space for going to work in society independently, or sending them to centers and stuff like that, becomes a redundant choice. And it, more than that, what it does is that it takes away the time that you could have spent to practice and repeat, practice and crystallize a skill set which probably had a future. Okay, so I find that is something that is very, very, very frustrating when I'm working with this population. All right. The other thing that I also find very frustrating with this population is a tendency to focus on compliance and consistency, which I think is, very weird, because honestly speaking, all of us would not like it if I did this, if all the people who are listening to me right now, if I went and taped your mouth and I said that you just have to listen to me, I'm not going to listen to you at all. I can give you on a stamp paper that you will stop coming to me. You will stop going to that person. But somehow we seem to expect that this population should not be talking, we should not be listening to them. On the other hand, I have this other extreme of population where I have had parents who are like, I can understand what the child needs to say. I don't need him to say it, which again confuses me. How can you understand what the child, needs to say? You're basically, I mean, I don't have kids of my own, but I have two cats, and I can tell you that I don't always understand what they're trying to say. I have to watch their body language, I have to listen to them, I have to test them to be able to understand what they're saying. So it's quite ridiculous that a cat, who is basically an animal, if he or she also has a mindset of their own, you're telling me an autistic child doesn't have a mindset of his own? I mean, that's ridiculous. All right. So that's, again, another frustrating point that is there. So what is my end point to it? My end point to it is that this is a population which is essentially the most severely affected, Okay, in autism, in the history of autism, this is the population that is the worst treated. Okay, experimented on a lot, treated, abused a lot, and essentially, underestimated a lot. But according to me, this is a population, if you would do well, if you, instead of looking all around, if you just looked at your child, looked at his profile, understood what the child can do, what are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, and what does he require, and then make a catered plan for the child and just stick to it every single day till the time the child achieves it, the child will become functionally, independent in a controlled environment. All right. That's it for today. Thank you.